Okay, I think we're getting close to 10:01, and I don't want to besmirk our great reputation of keeping everyone on time for our webinars here at the Chamber. So I think I'll kick it off and welcome everyone, and thank you all for joining us this morning. My name is Kent Roberts. As I said, I'm the Vice President of Policy here at the Chamber and your host for today's webinar. And today's discussion is about mindset and process improvement, as you know, one of our continuing series of navigating COVID-19 webinars. And what we mean by that is how we can change the way we think and process things differently to solve COVID-19 challenges. Our guests today are experts who are going to help us understand and achieve that type of mindset. And this webinar format is a bit different than usual, as opposed to just seeing the speakers and their presentation. Our speakers today have some interactive exercises that are planned. So I'm asking everyone to please turn on your videos to participate. And that also means, because this is more of a Zoom format than a typical webinar format, that you can ask questions directly. So make sure you unmute yourself and jump in and ask questions as they come to you. So to get started, let me introduce our guests. We have Joe Britto, who is a mindset consultant and author of The 6 Attributes of a Leadership Mindset. Welcome, Joe. Thanks very much for being here. And we have Robert Newcomb, an associate partner with the Barrington Consulting Group, who co-leads the Barrington Operational Performance Services Practice. That's a mouthful, Robert, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. So again, thank you, our guests and our speakers and all of you for joining us this morning. And to get it going, I'll pass it over to Joe. Thanks, Joe.
Over to you, Robert.
I guess, Joe, you can pass it right to me. Thank you very much, Kent. No, all good. Thank you for the introduction. And I've heard a lot about this running on time. So Joe and I will be sure to do our part to condense this, because there's a lot of stuff and we're very passionate, as you're about to see, into 30 minutes. And then I'll give everyone lots of time to jump in and ask questions at the end. So our focus here today, as Kent mentioned, is around mindset and how that works closely with process improvement. And the focus here is with small and medium-sized businesses around COVID-19 recovery, improvement, and innovation. So just a very quick introduction to who I am. My name is Robert Newcomb. I've been an associate partner with Barrington Consulting now for 7 years, and my background is industrial engineering, and I actually have my Lean Six Sigma black belt. So I've been doing consulting, training, facilitating, coaching over the past 7 years. My interests really lie in Lean Six Sigma process improvement, but we're doing a lot of strategy now with data analysis and visual management. So Barrington Consulting, if those may be familiar with our company, we've been around for 17 years, mostly with the public sector, provincial government and HRM, but we're really expanding, especially with process improvement, to the small and medium-sized enterprises. So, Joe?
Well, thank you, Robert. So Innate Leaders, what we do is we help leaders think differently. And so I'm a mindset consultant, and the way that we do that is really by helping to grow a leadership mindset, which I'll speak about in just a minute, and then applying that to a shift in thinking to the team or the business challenge that businesses face. So we were formed in 2008, and since then we've worked with businesses like Coca-Cola and Lockheed Martin and NASA, but today we'd like to focus on COVID-19. It's made such a dramatic impact on the business landscape that we partnered with Barrington Consulting to develop a way to help businesses to navigate through and beyond the pandemic. So I think a place to start really is to just be really clear about what the problem is. So if you wouldn't mind just passing over to the next slide, Robert, thank you. These are some of the problems that, you know, in my experience anyway, that some businesses have been facing. It's not an exhaustive list, so perhaps your problem isn't there or your challenges aren't there. But these are just some of the things that people are facing. And in the face of this, when we start to look at the problems that COVID-19 is throwing up for us, we can start to feel like there's nothing we can do. We can start to feel like things are out of our control. We can start to feel like we just need to hunker down and just ride it out. But the thing is it's not all doom and gloom. So our next slide, please, Robert, if you don't mind, is an example of 2 solutions that 2 businesses found to to adapt. One of them you possibly heard of is Stanfield's, which is here in Nova Scotia. And what they did is they normally make underwear, and they pivoted to making medical gowns. And the other example that I have up here is actually in Toronto, but there's lots of restaurants that have been kind of moving away from selling, you know, their food as, you know, in a restaurant, and instead they've been packaging up their food. Some of them have just been selling like groceries, so they sell flour. And some of them, which is why I have this one here on Instagram, that what they did is they were famous for their sauces. They're an Italian restaurant, famous for their sauces. So they did sell dry pasta, they did sell flour, but also what they did is they packaged up their sauces and they sold those. The thing that's interesting to me is that what these businesses were able to do is they found these solutions because they were willing to think differently, and more importantly, perhaps, they were willing to do things differently. So that gets to our next question, I guess, which is our next slide, which is, well, how did they do that? So why is it that some businesses are struggling while others are finding ways to adapt? What are the ones that are thriving doing differently? That's our big question. And the answer, I guess, is kind of a bit in that picture, but a bit in the whole context of this whole presentation, because what they're doing is they're thinking differently. They're allowing themselves to think differently, and it's that is allowing them to begin to do things differently. So let's explore what it is that allows them to do that. And that's our next slide. So there's a lot of talk about mindset, and though we all know mindset is referring to the way we think, we can be a little bit more precise than that. So in this picture, what I have here is there's a person who is sitting in a box, and they're very happy. And the box that they're sitting in is what I will call our worldview. It's the way that we look at the world, and it's the way that we see the world. And 99% of the time, that worldview will work for us beautifully, and there will be no problems, and everything will be fine. But then sometimes it doesn't. So just for a small little teeny example of what I mean by sometimes it doesn't, have you ever had this experience? Have you ever been in an elevator where you walk in, let's say you're on the ground floor, and you walk into the elevator, you hit floor 15, and the elevator goes up, and the doors open, and you step out, and it takes you like a nanosecond or so, a couple of seconds, to realize, oh, hold on, this isn't floor 15, this is floor 10, and then you have to get back in the elevator and go back up again. Does that ever happen to anybody? Actually, I should say too that if you want to, I am going to be a little interactive here from time to time, and we'll get like a little exercise going for you too. And if you want to, you can just type your message or your answers in the chat box as we're going along. If you want to, you can send it directly to us, to me, or if you want to, you can send it to everybody. That'll be fine. Okay. But my guess is that probably has happened to you at some point or another. And even though it's just a very small example, it's an example of how our worldview informs the way that we act and the way that we behave, because our worldview in that case is when I go into an elevator, I hit the floor I want, and the next time the doors open, it's the floor that I want. So what happens every now and then is that our worldview, if you like, or our mindset comes into conflict or contradiction with the world as is. What I mean by that is the world as it really is different from our worldview. And when that happens, there can be a challenge sometimes. And that sort of starts to beg the question, well, what happens in those instances? So when our worldview collides, if you like, with the world as is, what actually happens and how do we process the information? And that might sound like a really complicated question, but actually it's ridiculously easy to answer. And it's our next slide. Because the thing about what happens is if the information coming to us from the outside world reinforces our worldview, we accept it. And if it doesn't, then we don't. And that often doesn't matter. But it does matter if we're leaders, because as leaders, we need to hear and perhaps act on information that doesn't fit with how we see the world. And it matters right now because in a world that is changing because of COVID-19, working the way we've always worked means we don't flex and adapt to the real challenges facing us. To think differently, we don't need to remove our worldview. All we need to do is make it permeable. And that's our next slide, Robert. Thank you. And it's that permeable worldview that allows us to come up with new ways of working. What I mean permeable is that new ideas from the outside world that perhaps don't jive with how we see the world, we still allow them in. And as leaders, that means that as we get this new information, we can start to do things differently. We can think differently to do things differently. So if I'm not being clear, then let me explain with a really simple example. A famous example, in fact. I'm sure you've seen this picture before. This is from Harvard University. It's about 1957, and there's a picture of an old lady and a young lady in this picture. So if you look a certain way, you can see an old lady. If you can look a certain way, you can see a young lady. My question isn't really about can you see an old lady or can you see a young lady? My question is, can you see them both at the same time? And you can write an answer into the chat box if you want to. That's the question of the minute. Can you see both an old lady and a young lady at exactly the same time? And you have a couple of people saying, yes, yes, I can. But my question is, and then we have another person saying, well, sort of, kind of, and then no, and then, well, yes, but I noticed the old, I noticed the young lady first. And that's, you know, that's kind of our point, is to see them at exactly the same time, like literally the same time, not like a nanosecond difference, at exactly the same time. Can we see that? And we're getting lots of different responses. Thank you very much for that. And the majority of the responses seem to be saying, no, I can't see them both at the same time. And that's fair, and that's true, and that's kind of my point, really, to be honest with you, because what we're seeing is, in order to see the young lady, let's say, I need to let go of the old lady, if only for a nanosecond. And the same thing if I want to see the, you know, if I want to see the old lady. And that's my point, because in the world, in our businesses, in order to adapt to COVID-19, we need to let go of what we've always done. Kind of like Danville's, take that for example, right? So they were making underwear, and they could have kept on making underwear. But what they did is they saw a need, if you like, they saw a hole in the market, they saw, and they decided to take it. So the way that we do this work, though, the way that we help people shift their thinking to be able to let go of something, is by what we call the 6 attributes. And that's our next slide. And you can see it's things like flexibility of mind and genuine curiosity. Genuine curiosity is a learning mindset, and it's the mindset of allowing us to ask really basic questions that help us push the boundaries of our thinking. Flexibility of mind is about not being attached to one way of doing things, but being able to pivot in our thinking really quickly. And the way that we work is, what we do is we create experiences, what we call challenges, because they're challenges to the way that we think, to help people push the boundaries of their thinking and then apply that new way of thinking to their business. And what I'd like to do, if you guys are up for it, this is the interactive bit I was talking about, because I'd like to give you guys an experience of just one of these things. And if you wouldn't mind the next slide, please, Robert. It would be a thing that I call flexibility of mind. So if you wouldn't mind playing along, I'd really appreciate it. And what I'd like you to do, if you could be so kind, is you don't have to go very far. Just look at your desk and see if you can find 3 things, 3 objects on your desk that perhaps aren't necessarily associated with each other. And then what I'd like you to do is to put these 3 things together. So let me just give you an example. If I was playing right now, I don't have very much on this desk, but if I was playing right now, I've got an elastic band, I've got a pen, and I've got, it's kind of like a wadded up twist tie. So I've got these 3 things. So what I'm asking you to do is to find 3 things on your desk, not very far from you, just kind of pull 3 objects. And when you found these 3 objects, then what I would like you to do is to see if you can, if you like, repurpose them to have one function, to be one thing rather than 3 different things. So how can these 3 things, a twist tie, a rubber band, an elastic band, and a pen, how can those morph into one object with one purpose? Does that make sense? So give it a go. I'll give you about like a minute or so to see if you can come up with something. And we'll see if we can do that. So have a go. Don't forget what I'm saying is three different things that are going to have one shared purpose. That's what we're looking for. We'll have a go. 3 different things. When you have your 3 things, you can, as I say, combine it. But if you can combine it really quickly, you can put up in the chat box what you combine them into. And if you don't mind playing along, in about 30 seconds, give or take, you can unmute your mic, and you can tell us what were those 3 things and what did you convert them into? What did you combine them into? Okay, so give you like another 30 odd seconds or so, 20 seconds, give or take. Put your thinking caps on. What can you come up with? What 3 objects can you combine into one object, into one thing? So they all have the same purpose or a shared purpose, working as a different object. So what I mean by that is my pen, for example, is not going to continue to be a pen. It's going to continue. It's going to be something else combined with the other 3. Okay, so give it a go. Give you about another 10 seconds or so, so kind of give you some time to think about it at least. As I say, if you would like to unmute your mic and tell us what those 3 objects were and what you combine them into, that's perfectly fine. That'd be great. I'd really appreciate that, actually. And if you don't want to do that, if you just want to type in the message box what your 3 objects were and what they are now, that would be really helpful too. Okay, so let's hear from you. What 3 objects did you pick, and what did those 3 objects become? That's my question. Is anybody able to answer? So someone has a bunch of bananas, a fruit bowl, and a cell phone. And what they did is they flipped the bowl upside down with the banana. Hold on. They flipped the bowl upside down underneath with the banana, and it's a temporary use for my phone. Either to decide either. Okay, so I guess what it is it's like a cell phone holder. That sounds about right. Oh, there we go. So a temporary banana holder. Is that the idea?
No, it's to stop myself. It's to be more productive. So I've hidden my cell phone underneath the bananas. If I get distracted by my phone, I just grab a banana instead. So now I'm eating healthier.
That makes complete sense. Thank you. That's a great one. Then we have another person here. They have 3 objects. It was an apple, a roll of stamps, and a notebook. What did you do with them? Can you let us know? What did they become? And then we have somebody else here who has a water bottle, a mask, and a pen, and it became a pen holder. Okay, so we have a bunch of different things. That's cool. If that was a challenge for you, let me just give you an example of what I would do. So with these 3 things here, my pen, my elastic band, and this thing, whatever this is, what I could do with it is I could make the elastic band and the pen work together. It becomes kind of a catapult, and then this thing becomes the projectile, and then I could use it like that. You see, what I'm talking about here is what we're doing is we're using something that isn't connected or associated, and we are connecting them to form one function. And if it's difficult to do that, it's understandable because, in this example, we know what these things are. We know what a pen does. So I can use, something to become a pen holder, for example, but the pen is still a pen. So it's difficult sometimes for us to step out of this is what this is for and this is what this does, and then to find a completely different purpose for it. Like if you can recall in this example that I'm talking about here, this pen isn't acting as a pen anymore. It's acting as a part of a catapult. And the thing that makes that hard is what I call the expert mind, which is our next slide. Because think about this in terms of your business. If I can only see one way of doing things, if I can only see this is how my business operates, let's think about a restaurant. If I'm a restaurant and I say, well, the only way my restaurant can operate is if I'm selling prepared food to my clients, you know, to my customers. That's it. There is no other way for a business to operate. And if that's how I'm thinking, then what it means, it becomes tough for me to pivot. And the reason I call this the expert mind is because the expert mind is the thing that pushes out innovation. It kind of prevents, if you like, innovation. Because what the expert mind does is it says, you know, I know about my business. I know what is going on. I know what the next step should be. And it has this certainty to it, which then means that it's difficult to innovate. The way that an expert mind tends to work is from a mindset perspective, how people determine a course of action. It's a really simple process. All we do is we reach back into our inventory of past experiences and decisions and actions, and we look for the one that closely resembles the challenge in front of us. And though that might work, you know, 98% of the time, and that shorthand is really helpful, the problem with using that in a COVID-19 world is that we have no repository of similar experiences to draw on, unless you've lived through a pandemic before. So what we did, Barrington and Innate Leaders, what we did is we looked at the stages of COVID-19 recovery for businesses. And that's our next slide. And one thing that is true in all of these stages is we need innovation. We need to be genuinely curious, and we need flexibility of mind. Think of it like this. If you're a business owner, my guess is when you started your business, you looked at the holes in the market and you thought about how you could use your skill and knowledge and experience to find a niche for your product and a niche for your business. That same way of thinking is what we need now, whether you're a business owner or a business leader. The Innate Leaders and Barrington Consulting partnership that we have is unique, and that's our next slide, because it focuses on two things really: thinking differently and doing things differently. And that means that we can find a route through the COVID-19 landscape if we're willing to push the boundaries of our own thinking.
Great, thank you, Joe. And moving on from the think differently, do things differently, kind of those two large phases, we've broken this down into a model that we've called crisis. So it starts with calculating, understanding where you are, what your current state is, you know, what your problems are, what your opportunities are, and kind of using the data and evidence-based decision-making to help inform your steps forward. And then the next three steps are kind of what Joe's already talked about. It's that reframe. It's that changing in mindset and that flexibility of mind to understand where you're at now, what your business is doing and what it can do and how it can pivot in the future. And that reframing and training can lead to innovation. And that's where you start looking at all your ideas, all your different options, and then prioritizing and then selecting that option. So once you've selected, it's a matter of implementing and then not just, you know, putting it in and letting it go. It's making sure that you sustain those improvements and those changes. So that's all a part of doing things differently. So if we look at traditional process improvement, we usually look at this model on the left. And if you think of a graph and, you know, customer satisfaction or customer expectations as that middle line going forward, if you're not meeting customer expectations, if your performance is low, we call that problem solving. You know, you need to close the gap. You're firefighting, you're, you know, doing urgent things. You seem to be running around solving all these problems, but not making much progress. But once you start meeting the customer expectations, the satisfaction, and performing better, then you get into a model of continuous improvement. So it's just doing something better, like 1% better every single day to be the best in the class and be a high performer in your industry. If you look to the right with the COVID-19 model, what we see is your operations haven't changed, but the environment around you has changed. So as a result, you're not performing as high as before. And to get back above, you need that mindset and innovation to become a high performer. So the traditional tools and approaches may not work as well for you. And I love this quote from Peter Drucker at the bottom here. Problem solving, however necessary, does not produce results. It prevents damage. Exploiting opportunities produces results. So this is really a time where instead of hunkering down and really kind of looking at some of the problems or root causes, it's opening up your mindset to seeing what's available around you. And a key piece to kind of coming to this innovation is using data to help guide some of your decision making. So this model here looks at 5 stages of decision making. And if we start on the left here, kind of the immature organization, they're flying blind, they're totally reactive. So they're not collecting data on their own. They're not proactively collecting data from customers. They might receive a phone call or a complaint, and they're just being completely reactive to what they're hearing. As we move across the scale here, maybe you're collecting some data, it's disjointed, it's in a number of different databases or spreadsheets, or individuals are collecting it and not sharing it. So they're using it for kind of information or decisions in silos. Or maybe they're looking at data from history, but it's still very reactive. And so what we want to do is take an organization from reactive to proactive. So if you think of the show CSI, the show opens and often there's a dead body and they're stuck wondering, how did this happen? They're going back, they're looking through evidence, they're interviewing people, and they're trying to figure out how they got to this situation. And what we want to do with organizations is move them to a situation such as the movie Minority Report. This is where they can see the future and they're actually arresting criminals before they commit their crimes. So this is very much in a proactive stage where you can actually sense what's going to happen in the future because you have all of this data and all of these measures to forecast. So if your organization is in the sense, then you might have been able to see the effects of COVID-19 coming before they actually hit Nova Scotia because you were tracking it across the world. Or as soon as it happened, okay, we need to pivot quickly because we know our supply chain is going to be disrupted. So it's using data to help with decision making to move forward. So with data collection, we'll call all of these different pieces of data strategic dots. So maybe it's internal pieces of data, you're measuring your KPIs, financial metrics, maybe it's safety, customer satisfaction, employee engagement. I don't know if anyone can guess why I have a little hedgehog up in the top left there. That's the hedgehog concept from Good to Great. So what are you really passionate about? What drives your economic engine? What can you be best in class in? All of these different elements, what we call strategic dots, can help get you and move you towards innovation. So with Joe's example of 3 items on your desk, those could be 3 examples of strategic dots. And you might have to, your dots may have been used in one way, such as a restaurant and serving food to customers at a dining room. Maybe you can take those dots, rearrange them a little bit to come up with a new service offering or a new target market. That's one thing that's happened is a lot of things are now being done virtually or digitally, where you don't necessarily need to serve someone to the customer next door. We can now do services online and really kind of expand your market. So it's important to remember that the light bulb wasn't invented because of continuous improvement of the candle. Sometimes you really have to rearrange these dots to make big strategic leaps in your thinking to get to that innovation. Oops. So at that end part of that crisis model, we talk about implementation and sustaining. And whenever we do implementing, we talk about it's very important to have a roadmap. So roadmap would just be a high level plan of what you're going to accomplish, who's going to accomplish it, and how it's going to get done. And these 5 bullets here are from a McKinsey article that was just published in July and shows how decision-making has really changed in a lot of ways for the better based on the effects of COVID-19. So at the top here, we see speed up and delegate decision-making. So this is important because it allows teams to be creative and have the autonomy to determine, how to best achieve the goal. So how do you best use your team members and other employees instead of making all of the decision-making top down from leadership? with execution excellence, this is, conditions are so difficult that there's a lot of stress throughout the entire organization. But allowing frontline employees, the ones that are seeing the issues, the problems, see the opportunities to take on more responsibility for execution, action, and collaboration. So it's no longer just leadership responsible for execution. That responsibility is shared throughout. And this turns into flattening the structure. So more people taking action and actually doing, and then fewer time and fewer people spent on briefing each other, reporting, seeking approvals, sitting in unproductive meetings. We see a lot of this routine that was in Lean Six Sigma we'd call waste. There's no time for that anymore, and decisions need to be made faster. And that's what we'd want to see as far as making changes in a COVID environment. Nimble and empowered teams. This is getting different silos or different departments in your organization working together. So these teams are empowered to make their own decisions, but they're also working together maybe in teams that never worked together before because they were segmented in their own divisions. And it's also a great opportunity to field tomorrow's leaders today. So taking those younger folks or someone that's new to your team or new to your organization and empowering them to make decisions and to execute and to pilot and experiment with different ideas. Because these are the ones that are looking for new opportunities and to lead in the face of uncertainty. And often the ones that have the grit to persevere. So it's a great, if you just change your mindset a little bit, it's a great opportunity to help empower and encourage those that may not have had an opportunity to before. So that was the end of our presentation. There's a great opportunity. What Joe and I do is we offer this kind of much larger extent in a workshop and training format. And we can do that virtually or in person. So there is funding available through the government. Our training is eligible through the WIPSI funding program, through Labor and Advanced Education. So if you are a small business, less than 50 employees, you can actually receive our training for free. And that's up to a $10,000 value. And for larger organizations, there's that opportunity at a 50% discount. So if you do have any questions about that, feel free to follow up with myself. My contact information's here, or Joe, and we'll get back in touch with you as soon as we can. So now I'd like to open it up to any questions, and I think Kent, you may have some questions there, as well as if anyone has any other questions, feel free to just write it down in the chat, or even hop on the video or on the mic and ask us now.
Great, Rob. Thank you, and thank you, Joe, as well. A really fascinating presentation, and I really took a lot out of that, which is great. And as Rob said, please unmute your mic and jump in with a question if you have one, or write it in the chat, and we'll get to it very quickly. There were some fascinating pieces there, guys, that I took away. And some things you take for granted potentially in a crisis like COVID about thinking differently and doing things differently. But I think we've all seen multiple examples of the organizations that were able to pivot and think differently and do things differently. And I think as Joe said to me before we started this, the people that are standing still and struggling with standing still are the ones that are going to continue to struggle as this crisis goes on. So I think there's some real strong tools here, and I encourage everyone who's on the line that, as Rob said in his last slide, to avail of these tools as you need them. And I love the quote, "Make your view permeable." I think that's a real strong takeaway as from a leader. Which kind of leads me to my first question. Is you talked a little bit about how you make this live in an organization, but this is kind of focused towards leaders making that change. But how does a leader really broaden that scope throughout an organization to get everyone on board with this type of mindset during a time like this?
That's a really good question, because I think that the idea behind what we're talking about is, you're right that we, like with Innate Leaders, we mostly work with leadership teams. But if this idea of a permeable worldview, of thinking differently, if it only lived in a leadership team, then there's a benefit to that, but the benefit is limited. And our idea is mostly if you can work with a leadership team and you can get them to champion and to get behind the idea of thinking differently in this way that we do with the 6 attributes, then we usually help them start to cascade that through the business. So first of all, by modeling it. Second of all, by exposing people to these ideas, and sometimes even just changing the way that you actually work so that it encourages people to start to think differently. So for example, one business that I worked at, they did this thing. There's this one idea that I have with Innate Leaders that we work with called breaking the idea, which is after we come up with an idea, we then, rather than go, yeah, like that idea is great, let's just roll with that. We come up with an idea, whether it's great or not, and then we break that idea to see what are the possible pitfalls of that possible, of that idea. And this one business that I'm thinking about, what they did is, in order to help cascade this work through the entire business, is they held these things that they call break parties, which was basically they would have an idea, possibly as a leadership team or possibly that evolved in the business, and then they would encourage people to come to, let's say, like a lunch. They would put pizza and pop on. They would do a short presentation of the idea. They'd say, so here's our idea. And then they would give the majority of the meeting over to whoever happened to be there. It wasn't compulsory, to then just say, well, this is what I think is wrong with the idea. This is what I think doesn't work. Those people didn't have to solve the idea. They just had to say the things that weren't working about the idea. And the beautiful thing about that is that it sends this sort of ripple through the entire business that says, we don't hold ideas to be precious. We are out to find the best idea versus the idea that we settle on. And we want you to start to do the same thing. So they started to do that as a leadership team for the entire business within about, a short time of me working with them. But then the really great thing that came of that is that people throughout the business started to do that too. So they weren't part of the leadership team. They were just part of, the entire staff. And the entire staff started to go, well, actually, if the leadership team thinks this is a great idea, then perhaps we should be doing that too. So they started to hold their independent, if you like, break parties. So I guess my direct answer to your question, Ken, is that once leaders start to really understand these ideas and they start to embody it, then we can start to roll it out through the rest of the team, not by here's some theory, but more by here's an example and here's us demonstrating a different way of working.
That's great. Thank you very much, Joe. And I'm also fascinated by, I've interacted with Barrington Consulting many times, and certainly not with Joe so much, but certainly with the mindset thinking. And they go together, but they're both separate. So there's a process piece and there's a mindset piece. So, as a small organization or as a big organization, which one do you start first? Do you change the mindset, or do you change the processes that enable the mindset?
Funny chicken and egg one, isn't it? So my feeling would be that changing the mindset allows you to come up with different processes. So the problem, I'm sure you have a perspective too, Robert. I think that the problem sometimes of people, and I see this quite a lot of people, let's say in a COVID-19 situation, that they go, oh, there's a problem here and we need to solve it. And it goes back to the thing that I said in the presentation, that what we tend to do when we do that is we go back into our inventory of problems and solutions in our head that we've lived through, and we go, oh, actually, this problem is a lot like that problem. I'll do much the same thing. But those kinds of approaches don't create what I would call revolutionary ideas. So instead of that, if we shift our thinking first of all and we work on that, then we're able to come up with something that is completely different than we would have done before, which could be completely revolutionary. I don't know if you want to add to that or not, Robert.
Yeah, and I think that would be the basic approach is, with a change in mindset, you'd be able to improve your processes that much more drastically. But depending on the organization and the people, that mindset change could be very quick. It could be a very long time. And you wouldn't want to keep enduring problems as you're going through that mindset. So it could be very iterative and can almost be in parallel, that if there are those quick fixes, those quick wins, do those. continuously work through that process improvement and that continuous improvement as you're going through the mindset. And then as you're practicing some of the problem solving techniques, it can actually apply to mindset. And same with if you're going through the mindset work or working on that culture piece of the organization, you can also apply that back to process improvement. So they work very, very well together. And again, I don't think it's one versus the other, but a lot of it can be done in parallel as you're building both pieces of your business.
That's great. Thank you, Robin. My intent wasn't to cause a scrap between you two. But building on that a little bit, so let's assume you've made some changes in your organization and you're starting to see some results, maybe a quick change during this crisis. And we're doing this in light of COVID, but how do you make this type of mindset thinking sustainable in an organization? And maybe that's a question directed at you, Joe, but certainly both of you can jump in.
The thing that I love about mindset, so I think, to be fair, maybe I should reveal some of my background, is that I started off in 2000 as a psychological coach, and then I became, then I kind of added to that with leadership, and then I added that to management consulting. I started doing all of these things, and one of the things I started to notice is that sustainability is really important, and that really comes down to the business and how engaged are they and how much do they want to sustain these things. You can't make somebody sustain something if they don't want to. But one of the cool things about mindset work is that when people are kind of open and willing to think about the way they think, which is essentially mindset work, and to start to create a shift in thinking, that shift in thinking stays with the business. And it doesn't disappear. It's almost like that thing about once you see something, you can't unsee it. Once you've shifted your mindset, you can't unshift your mindset. So you don't have to continually go back into a business and say, is this working for you and do you need to do it? Because once they've created that shift in thinking, they've applied that shift in thinking to what they're going to be doing differently, you might say that they now have the tools or the way of looking at the world to be able to address whatever problem comes down the road. Once you have flexibility of mind, you always have flexibility of mind. Once you have genuine curiosity, you always have it. So that's, that's, to me, that's the value of mindset work.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Joe, very much. I'll just pause for a second to see if anyone wants to jump in with a live question and unmute themselves. Okay. If not, I'll ask a couple more questions. And Robert, when I think about Six Sigma and process improvement, and this is a double-edged question, so I'll ask it kind of in two parts. But so, what about the small business that doesn't collect a lot of data? They don't have those kind of tools in their tool set. How do they start? And conversely, what about the large organization that has so much data that they can't see the forest for the trees? How do they approach that from integrating that data into a process improvement?
Yeah, both definitely challenging problems with completely different approaches to solve them. And I think for the small businesses, when people think data, especially in recent years, you start thinking about big data and computers and systems collecting all this different types of information, CRMs or financial systems or whatever it might be, but it can be very simple. It can be as simple as a piece of paper and a clipboard. And if you have a retail store, just tallying people as they come in the door. So it might just be a simple pen and paper exercise. And then you can see, okay, how many people entered my store today? When were they coming in? Was I busier in the morning, in the evening, around coffee breaks? Maybe I should be adjusting my hours of my stores now, because what a lot of people haven't realized is COVID-19 has dramatically changed customer behavior. And I know this was in my case too, in April, May, I did not go into the grocery store once without a grocery shopping list, where before I rarely went with a shopping list because you didn't want to go to the store every single day. You wanted to minimize risk and behavior. So you're getting 3 weeks worth of groceries and you didn't want to miss something. So people come in with a list. And stores had to almost adjust and adapt to that because your promotions didn't make as big of a deal in store, because if it wasn't on the list, you weren't buying it. So helping just collect simple data such as that, and talking to your customers. And it doesn't necessarily need to be that quantitative, but even that qualitative data information can help make decisions. So I guess that's on the small business, not collecting any data. The easiest things to do is pen and paper and talk to your customers. With the larger businesses, you got to start somewhere, and you might even go back to manual collection of data versus trying to sift through large amounts of systems. But you really need to begin with the end in mind and understand, okay, what questions do I want answered? So instead of trying to reverse engineer it and saying, okay, I have all this data, let's analyze it. It's okay, what questions do I want answered? And then start picking through the data and analyzing it from there. So trying to piece it off and have the questions in mind first versus the data first.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Know where you want to go, and then find how you want to get there. So thank you for that, Rob. And just technically, I'll ask one last question, then open it up one more time. But for those that are not really familiar with some of these processes, Rob, what's the difference between Lean, Six Sigma, continuous improvement, and process improvement? So I know that's a very technical question, but I think for someone in a small business, some of these terms may be new to them.
Right. So yeah, they're all very similar, and they come from different methodologies and histories. But to me, I use process improvement and continuous improvement more or less interchangeably. Process like everything is a process. You know, waking up in the morning and going to work, or starting work at your home, is a process. You set your alarm the night before, you get out of bed, you shower, you get changed, you brush your teeth. All those steps are a process. And process improvement is just looking at your processes and making them more efficient or more effective, adding more value. Continuous improvement is just looking at your processes and just doing something incrementally better every single day. So continuous improvement is more of a mindset about improvement and a culture about improvement, that everyone's involved and you can do a little bit better. And those results, even though it's very minor, day after day after day, after weeks, months, and years, it's a huge difference if you're looking at 1% better every day. Lean is just a background from Toyota in lean manufacturing systems. And basically Lean boils down to just adding value and eliminating waste. So looking at your processes. And then Six Sigma is a little bit more on the data statistics side of things. So looking at your processes, looking at the data and making better decisions based on statistical information and a bit more analysis.
Great,
but it's all process improvement. It's all continuous improvement. It's just different ways to slice and dice and look at it.
Yeah, no, I think that's very helpful for people. I think that's great. Thank you very much. We did have one question on the chat, and it's a very technical question, but is it possible that people can get email copies of the diagrams that you showed in your presentation today? So we can certainly post that presentation on our website at the Chamber, or share it with people if you guys are okay with that.
Yeah, we can, I mean, like, we can send you guys this, this deck, and you can have that.
Okay, that'd be great. And we can post that for anyone online here. We'll have it on the on our website on our website for them to access. So thank you very much for that. So I'll open it one last time to anyone who may have another question from the group participating. I'll give it a second. Okay, if not, there you go. Okay, so Kayla had just sent a note that she'll include the deck in the follow-up email to everyone participating. So thank you, Kayla. That's great. So on that note, I think we'll wrap it up. We're a little bit early, and we never want to be late, but to be early is okay too. So I really want to thank Joe and Rob for sharing their expertise and insights with us. I found it a fascinating presentation. I hope everyone on board did as well. As a chamber, we continue to host webinars every week, as most people know, throughout COVID and continuously. So, we bring in the experts that we think will help lead our business community back to some semblance of new normal. So again, thank you to Joe and Rob for helping us with that. As Kayla alluded to, you can head to halifaxchamber.com/events for a full lineup of all the webinars that are coming up. And you can also access past webinars. These are all filmed and are on our YouTube channel as well. So there's a mighty library of webinars for people to access. On that note, again, I'll just thank everyone for joining us. I thank Joe and Rob for being here. Thanks, Kayla, for hosting. As a chamber, we do these things continually. We offer these as benefits to our members, but I would encourage you to look at that last slide again and take advantage of the benefits that can be offered by funding for your business to have people like Joe and Rob come in and help you through this crisis. And on that note, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I hope you have a great day, even though it's pouring rain out right now here in Halifax. It is due to clear off and be hot and muggy again. So thanks very much for joining us. I hope you got a lot out of this. I know I did. And thanks again to Joe and Rob. Appreciate it, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kent, Kayla, for having us. Enjoy your day, everyone. Thank you.